Greetings, I am Smokey, and welcome to the House of Hammer. For all you returning guests, welcome back. And I can see a few new faces here as well. You're more than welcome. Please join us. I do apologise about the weather. That thunderclap seems to happen every fortnight for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Now, as many of you know, we will be taking a grand tour around the House of Hammer. But what kind of host would I be without showing you to our next room? We come to room number 2 on our journey. We come from the mystery of the Mary Celeste to the rather more upbeat strains of Song of Freedom. As alluded to, Song of Freedom is a remarkably different beast to the mystery of the Mary Celeste. However, we thought it would be nice of us to give you a little bit of the history before we get there. And who better to walk us through the corridors of the beginnings of musical cinema than our very own cinematic starlet, Mr. Ben Taylorson.
When you think of musical cinema, you'd be forgiven if your thoughts didn't immediately turn to Hammer films. Of course, to most people, Hammer is synonymous with gothic horror and fantasy films from the mid-1950s to the 1970s. But before it found this niche, Hammer operated like any other film company, simply looking to cash in on whatever was popular. And in the 1930s, there was nothing more popular than musical cinema.
Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. Lou, listen, play Toot Toot Tootsie, 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead.
As pre-recorded sound was still a relatively new concept, musical cinema represented a fantastic opportunity to display just what cinema could offer an audience. This was storytelling beyond just dialogue, and without some of the restrictions that came with a live on-stage performance. Many, if not most of which, were completely inaccessible to huge proportions of the people who would come to enjoy musical cinema. In the 1920s alone, there were nearly 300 musicals on Broadway. The appetite for musicals was huge, and the cinema would allow more people than ever to enjoy them. In 1926, the introduction of Vitaphone allowed an audience to see and hear moving images simultaneously. Although this had been achieved before, Vitaphone's strength was an amplified speaker system that could fill large movie theatres with relatively clear sound. This led to the production of thousands of musical shorts. Warner Brothers' The Jazz Singer was the first full-length feature to have diegetic and non-diegetic music, as well as some dialogue, thus serving as an illustration of what was to be achievable. 2 years later, Broadway Melody was released, advertised by MGM as the first all-talking, all-singing, all-dancing feature film. It was, in effect, the first full-length musical.
Go on, that's it. The chorus in F sharp. There may be streets that have their sorrow, a smile today, a tear tomorrow. But there's a street that lives in glory. It always tells the same old story. Don't bring a frown to old Broadway. You've got a clown on Broadway.
And it was a smash hit, making back over 10 times its $380,000 budget and winning Best Picture at the 1930 Academy Awards. Also in 1929 came On With the Show, filmed in 2-strip Technicolor and declared by Warner Brothers to be the first 100% natural colour talking, singing, dancing picture. Their second all-colour musical feature later that year was Gold Diggers of Broadway, which broke all box office records and remained the highest grossing film ever produced until 1939. Now that movie makers and audiences alike had seen what could be done, and more importantly how well it sold, movie theatres were flooded with cinematic musicals. Notable titles included Hollywood Review, Hold Everything, and Under a Texas Moon. The poor reception and takings for 1930's King of Jazz, a movie that Universal had hoped would make a sizable profit, indicated that audiences were already tiring of the slew of musical cinema releases. Also, the effects of the stock market crash of October 1929 were beginning to be felt, and thus people were spending less freely at the box office.
We're in the money, we're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along.
But there was something else too. Until this point, musical cinema was largely an on-screen reproduction of what audiences had already seen on stage. Filmmakers were artificially restricting what could be done, based on what had been done before, and what they felt an audience wanted to see. The full potential of the media was yet to be realised. Audiences tired of it, to the extent that songs were cut from movies originally designed to be musical comedies. Even the popularity of the newfangled experience of colour films saw a decline, as audiences began to associate colour with musicals. Then, in 1933, one man would reignite the fortune of the cinematic musical by seeing beyond the limitations of theatrical space and bringing into production the idea of the camera taking the viewer on a journey beyond what was visible from merely the seat pointed to the stage. To Busby Berkeley, effective screen choreography involved the placement and movement of the camera as well as the singers and dancers. Rather than just filming the production from a number of fixed viewpoints, Berkeley would custom build movable monorails and booms to achieve as then unseen styles of cinematography. Kaleidoscopic patterns of uniformly costumed chorus girls became one of his trademarks, as did ranging shots of geometrically aligned dancers moving in unison. Gold Diggers of 1933 and 42nd Street, both choreographed by Berkeley, were two of the top grossing films of 1933. As part of the publicity campaign for the latter, Warner Brothers assembled a 7-car gold and silver plated train they called the 42nd Street Special. A number of Warner Brothers contracted stars rode as passengers as the train made a promotional tour across the USA, ending in Washington DC for the March 1933 inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. This was particularly apt as Warner Brothers had advertised the movie as inaugurating a new deal in entertainment, picking up on the speech where Roosevelt mentioned his own New Deal. But perhaps the ultimate exemplar of Berkeley's choreographic genius is evident in the 1933 movie Footlight Parade, starring James Cagney and Joan Blondell, specifically in the musical number By a Waterfall. As part of the extravagant choreography, Berkeley created his famous Human Waterfall. The musical number features a water ballet of chorus girls diving and swimming into water in elaborate geometric and floral patterns in a swimming pool that filled an entire soundstage. Busby Berkeley's vision and talent undoubtedly helped the entire genre of musical cinema to evolve. And so did that of another man, on the other side of the Atlantic. René Clair's 1931 French movie Les Millions was only his second movie to use sound, although his first, Under the Roofs of Paris, was shot as a silent film and then dubbed retrospectively. But the way in which the director used sound led to him becoming recognised as the first true master of the sound film. Clair used sound to comment on the action, to forward the narrative, to add extra dimensions to what was being viewed on screen rather than simply just to comment on it. So, by the mid-1930s, when Hammer turned their attention to producing a cinematic musical, the genre had begun to change almost fundamentally from what had first appeared only a few years earlier. Song of Freedom is not a stage musical film for screen. It is instead a melodrama interspersed with musical numbers that allow its star, Paul Robeson, to showcase his incredible singing voice. The poster for Song of Freedom describes this as being Robeson's most memorable role, but others would argue that came in another 1936 movie musical, Showboat. Robeson's rendition of Old Man River, a song that he had performed for the 1928 London stage production of the show and the 1932 Broadway revival, remains iconic to this day. For Song of Freedom, Robeson was given final cut approval, an unprecedented option at the time, and with a large degree of creative freedom. This was perhaps indicative of how much Hammer wanted Robeson on board, and how much they wanted the film to succeed. He was charismatic and brought with him that star quality. The nature of the movie, a black man born in London who is yearning to travel to Africa to find out more about his heritage, is unlikely to have been one that filmmakers in the USA at the time would back, but one that Robeson was passionate about. So Robeson and Hammer seemed to be, for Song of Freedom, a perfect fit.
As I go tramp, tramp, tramping on, heading for I don't know where.
there you have it, a wonderful tour through the start of musicals at the movies. If anyone wishes to excuse themselves to grab a dictionary and look up diegetic, I'm more than happy to wait. If you use my copy, you'll find it already open on the correct page. As mentioned by Ben there, the star of our feature presentation, Paul Robeson, seemed like a perfect fit for Hammer's second film. But he was more than just an actor and singer, as we're about to discover. To fill in the blanks for us, it's the man with a voice so soulful, even Mr. Robeson would be jealous. It's Adam Roach.
By the time Paul Robeson came to star in Song of Freedom, he had already arguably lived several more lives than the average man. His father, William, was a minister who'd been born into slavery in 1844 in North Carolina, and his mother, Maria, was a Quaker schoolteacher of mixed heritage who died in a house fire when Robeson was just 6 years old.
Swing low, sweet chariot.
Growing up, Robeson seemed to have an unquenchable appetite for achievement. Not only did he deliver sermons to his father's congregation, but also sang in the school chorus, starred in productions of Julius Caesar and Othello, and excelled at football, basketball, baseball, and track events. In fact, so dominant did Robeson become in sporting endeavors that his competitors, seeking some kind of petty revenge against his towering strength and ability, resorted to cheap racial taunts to try and break his concentration. Robeson merely shrugged away these attacks and continued to defeat them effortlessly.
Come in for to carry me home.
In 1915, his sporting prowess earned him the right to try out for the Rutgers College football team. This caused something of a sensation at the time. If Robeson was successful, then he would become the first ever African-American to make the team. At the tryouts, his potential teammates went in hard upon Robeson, eventually playing so rough that his shoulder was dislocated and his nose was broken. And yet each time he came crashing to the ground, Paul Robeson took a breath, climbed to his feet, and marched back into the game. By the time it was over, Robeson had won the respect and admiration of not just the squad, but also the coach, who declared that he had made the team and history.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me.
At college, he was not simply content to be a sports star, though. He joined the debating team, the stage performance, the glee club, and even took to singing on street corners so as to earn spending money.
In Salt Lake City, Joe says I am standing by my bed.
His father, William, became ill but refused to let Robeson return home to care for him, fearing that by doing so his education might suffer. But Robeson was determined, and so he travelled the 14 miles between his family home and college twice a day, so as to care for his father.
The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I.
When William passed away, Robeson found himself even more determined to ensure that his father's lifelong mission of establishing a fair society was seen to. By the time he graduated, he'd become so popular that his class elected him as their valedictorian. In his speech to them all, he called upon them to work for an America built upon equality.
Smiling with his eye.
He began to study law in 1919 while also devoting himself to the arts. His performances in the comedy Shuffle Along and in the drama Taboo were so well received in off-Broadway performances that he was invited to star in the London production of Taboo, which he accepted. When he got back, he graduated from law school and set up practice as a lawyer, but was so astounded by the level of racism he experienced that he decided instead to pursue a career in theatre. His first starring role came in Eugene O'Neill's 1923 play All God's Children Got Wings, a highly controversial drama about the black husband of an abusive white woman who, resenting her husband's skin color, destroys his promising career as a lawyer. The play caused an outrage due to its explicit racism and shocking dialogue, but made Paul Robeson's name as a performer. His next role was as Brutus Jones in O'Neill's The Emperor Jones, in which he kills another man in a dice game, is jailed, and then later escapes to a small Caribbean island where he sets himself up as the emperor. The play called for Robeson to deliver an almost 90-minute long monologue, but so impressive was he in the role that he soon became the toast of the theatrical world. In 1925, he made his screen debut in director Oscar Michaud's silent drama Body and Soul, while also developing a side career as a respected and popular performer of spiritual music.
There's an old man called Mississippi.
In 1928, Robeson took the role of Joe in Showboat, popularizing the song Old Man River.
Old Man River, that old man river. He must
This role resulted in his being invited to give a royal command performance at Buckingham Palace for then reigning monarch George V.
keeps rolling.
In 1930, Robeson and his wife Essie traveled to Switzerland to star in Borderline, an avant-garde experimental film dealing with a love triangle that tears apart an entire town. Robeson then traveled back to America to play the lead in the screen adaptation of his stage hit, The Emperor Jones, making him the first African-American actor to take the leading role in an American film. From here, he traveled back to the United Kingdom, where he took up the study of phonetic languages, specializing in Swahili.
Me, we sweat and strain.
Alongside his studies and concert performances, he also starred in more British movies. Sanders of the River saw him play a Nigerian tribal chief named Bosambo, a performance that drew much criticism for its negative stereotyping of colonial Africans. From here on out, Robeson determined to do all he could to try and shape the characters he played into something far more palatable and progressive. It was around this time that he began to look favorably over towards Russia and its communist teachings, which discounted race as a reason to discriminate. Indeed, upon a visit there, he found that for the first time, he was treated as an absolute equal, declaring that here was a place where he could be a human being for the first time in my life. Here I walk in full human dignity. It was for this reason that he sent his young son to Russia to be educated. 1936 was the year in which he starred in not only Showboat for Universal, reprising his stage role of Joe, but also Song of Freedom for Hammer, a film in which he became more invested than usual. Before signing to star in the movie, he insisted that his contract give him final cut approval, an extraordinary level of power for any star. But as Robeson stated at the time, this was crucial in allowing him to show a more empowering character of his heritage. Hitherto on the screen, he said, we have been characterized or presented only as comedy characters. This film shows us as real men. When he took the role of John Zinger in Song of Freedom, he was listed as the 10th most popular star in British cinema. Paul Robeson's subsequent lives contained countless chapters, each as varied and diverse as the prologue that led him to fame. Singer, actor, performer, sports star, lawyer, political activist. His is a story that's well worth discovering for yourself. Indeed, we've barely scratched the surface of this endlessly interesting man's life here. But for the purposes of our show, it's enough to know why it was that Hammer was so eager to secure the services of so already renowned a star for their lavish epic. Indeed, upon the marketing for the film, the studio proudly declared to the world that Song of Freedom was to feature Robeson in his most memorable role, cast of thousands, in a £500,000 epic.
What a guy. The life and times of Paul Robeson there from our resident curator of curiosities, Adam. Now, before we get to Song of Freedom, just one more little pause on our tour. As introduced to you on our previous episode, we'll be drawing on Hammer's vast history and introducing a person or persons into our Hall of Fame. Around here, we like to call them our Hammer Heroes. The honour of presenting the second Hammer Hero once again falls to the House of Hammer's magical musical maestro, Kev Moore.
Our hero of Hammer in this episode is Sir James Carreras, MBE. James is the son of Enrique Carreras, the founder of Exclusive Films, Hammer's original distributor. As we've mentioned before, Will and Enrique, Hammer's founders, played a variety of roles throughout their time in the company, and for nearly half a century it could almost be considered a family business of sorts, with James also wearing a variety of hats along the way. From projectionist to producer, cashier to chairman, young James knew the lot. James Carreras and Anthony Hines, the son of Will Hammer, had joined the fun for a brief stint, and things were looking up. At least until the advent of the Second World War and the first of Hammer's bankruptcies, that is. These prompted a sudden change of plan. With hindsight, it's quite obvious that whatever he put his mind to, James would work his hardest to succeed, which meant his military career was as distinctive as his civilian life. He joined the Honourable Artillery Company, the oldest regiment of the British Army, and due to him being a crack shot when it came to taking down V1s, he earned himself the nicknames Hair Trigger or Doodlebug Jim. By September 1944, he'd become a lieutenant colonel and found himself on Wardour Street promoting the documentary The Second Battle of London, a film about him and his company that by then had a 97% success rate. I mention Wardour Street mainly because this will become significant, but for now, it's all about our hero. Carreras was made an MBE in 1944, and after being demobbed in 1946, he returned to the family business at Exclusive Films and to his wife, Vera. Exclusive had seen out the war years, successfully reissuing films of proven commercial potential, and with his father now taking an increasingly backseat role in the running of things, this left the shrewd businessman James Carreras to set about expanding Exclusive and reviving Hammer as a production company. In 1947, he would even go on to produce the fantastically titled crime thriller Who Killed Van Loon? As he rarely went to the studios, it's a shame that Who Killed Van Loon has been lost to time like so many others, but James knew where his talents were, and they were in the boardroom and all the ballyhoo of the movies. On the other hand, his son Michael, who'd also joined the family business towards the end of the war, would go on to be a writer, director and producer of many Hammer films. While I'm giving Michael a mention, I might add that together with his wife Yvonne, who was Enrique's personal secretary, they boosted the family presence at Hammer with their sons Christopher, Anthony and Jimmy. As chairman of Hammer Productions, James started rebuilding the fortunes of Hammer, quite modestly at first by bringing fairly inexpensive shorts, radio and TV properties to the big screen. This and his Barnum-style flair for publicity and sales drew enough attention from the big hitters of Hollywood. His devotion to Variety Club in the UK and Variety Clubs International, in which he served as international president, made him some powerful friends that certainly helped to seal a 5-year deal with Columbia Pictures in 1959, just as Exclusive Films closed down. In October of that year, Films and Filming magazine named him Personality of the Month, where they described him as a voluble, vibrant and completely unaffected personality. As well as the Variety Club, he also had commitments to a number of other organisations, including the National Playing Fields Association and the London Federation of Boys Clubs. To this day, the Sir James Carreras Award, named in his honour, is presented annually at the Varieties World Conference to a physician who's demonstrated exceptional dedication and skill in the field of paediatrics. Ironically, it was this work that started to take him away from the real business at hand. And after Hammer Films were given the Queen's Award to Industry in 1968, and then his subsequent knighthood in 1969, like his father before him, he decided to take a step back, and on the 3rd of January 1971, Michael Carreras became Managing Director of Hammer Films.
Thank you, Kevy. Into the hallway of fame goes our second inductee, Sir James Carreras, MBE.
Right. We either need to get lower plinths or lighter busts, so I'm just going to start framing pictures, alright?
Apologies, problems with the staff. Anyway, On to the reason we are here, 1936's Song of Freedom. The film tells the story of Johnny Zinger, played by Paul Robeson, a black British dock worker who at once is rather settled with his wife Ruth, played by Elizabeth Welch, and his favourite hobby of singing, but also yearning to know more of his lineage and rightful home.
I wouldn't even give a penny for your thoughts, John.
Wouldn't you?
No. I know what they are.
Met a fella in the pub coming home. Sailing for Africa tonight. But they're casting off about now. In a week or two, he'll be on the coast.
Africa. It's always Africa, isn't it, John?
After all, that's my home. That's where we come from. I wonder which part. I'm always wondering. Perhaps there. Or there. What wouldn't I give to know?
But you're happy here. The people are kind.
Oh, I know. Oh, they're grand people. Bert and Nell and the fellas down at the docks. But somewhere in those parts are our people, Ruth. And I've got a feeling they're grand people, too. The people we belong to.
Before long, John is discovered by impresario Gabriele Donizetti, played enthusiastically by Esme Percy, and after an amount of training, unleashes John to great success on theatre stages far and wide.
Ah, my friends, at last. I thought you were never coming. Look after the lady. I'm delighted to see you. I cannot tell you what a joy it is to me. We'll waste no time. To work at once. Now, come along. A note, Blaney. Oh. Now, come along. No, stop. The breathing is all wrong. You see, the muscles for the breathing, they come from the diaphragm, so. And the voice, it comes from here, so. You see, voice, breathing, voice. Now, again, another note. Me. No. Chin up. So. Now again.
John enjoys almost instant success, and a chance meeting after a performance with an explorer discovers he is actually royalty of a small African island called Kasanga.
I'm an explorer and somewhat of an anthropologist. My reason for coming round tonight is I'm rather curious about that song you sang at the end. Where did you hear it?
I never heard it. Seems to have been born in me somehow.
Strange you should sing it tonight. It strikes a chord of memory in me somewhere. Perhaps you've heard it from your own people. You're from Africa?
No, he was born in London.
I don't know which part my people come from at all.
Oh, that's extraordinary.
The only link of any kind I have is this. Belonged to my father. Came to him from his grandfather. I think it's a slave tally.
Oh, let me see. Kasanga. I've got it.
You know what it is?
Yes, and it's also given me the clue to that tune. Kasanga, that's it.
Kasanga?
Yes, an island off the west coast of Africa. I remember it all quite clearly now. That's where I heard it. It's the King's song, the sacred song of freedom of their people. I'm probably the only white man who's ever heard it, and I was very lucky to escape with my life. And you've never been there?
No, never.
My friend, this disc is the symbol of kingship in Kasanga. Do you know you're probably a direct descendant of Queen Zinga?
You mean I come from Kasanga?
Undoubtedly.
Using his newfound wealth, John, Ruth, and their friend Monty travel to Africa to save the island from themselves. But do they want to be saved? It's time to dance to the tune of Song of Freedom. And to take you through it, you have myself, Kev, Ben, and Adam. So we should let everyone know that it won't always be like this, but every now and again we do have all four of us around the table. And welcome, Adam. Hello.
Hello.
And hello. Very well. So instantly into Song of Freedom, gentlemen. This gives us an insight into the step up in quality for Hammer. From the Mystery of the Mary Celeste. Adam, do you want to kick us off on this? It does seem like an upgrade.
Certainly. I mean, just look at the thing. I mean, Mystery of the Mary Celeste looks like it cost an absolute tenner to make. And then you have Song of Freedom, which even the marketing proudly declares that it's a £500,000 epic. And you can kind of see the scale. You can kind of see the scale in the cast. And also in the way it's made, it just looks like a better film. You have scenes in opera houses, you have scenes on islands, there are casts of thousands. The star, arguably, I would say, is bigger than Bela Lugosi, even though, I love Bela with all my heart. But Paul Robeson was actually 10th biggest draw at the UK box office around this time. So they obviously went all out. They thought, let's make some money on this thing. And you can see the money on the screen.
On the back of Showboat as well. And Paul Robeson was on fire, if you could be such a thing, in the 1930s. He was doing well. He was a star with charisma, and one that Hammer presumably thought that they could include in their picture to get people on board. And yeah, I'd concur with what you said, Adam, in terms of Bela Lugosi. But at this particular point, Paul Robeson was, his star was in an upward trajectory, and it was a real coup, I would argue, for them to have him in their film.
It's quite impressive, really, because look at these films they've got now. They've got Bela Lugosi in Mystery of the Mary Celeste / Phantom Ship. And then they get Paul Robeson for Song of Freedom. It's not like they were scratching around trying to make stars out of nobodies. They shot for the moon, and it's kind of impressive, really, I think.
Yeah, well, they were a small outfit at the time as well. You got to remember that even though they were on the board, the people that were involved in actually founding Hammer were still hands-on. You've even got Will Hammer. He turns up just as an extra.
He does. I think that another step up, apart from sort of the budget and the score and the soundtrack, which is obviously a lot better quality, along with the camera work and the editing, is the fact that Robeson he's got a lot more charisma than Bela Lugosi does. Mm-hmm. Personally. That's just my opinion.
You're not wrong.
I think he's given the opportunity to display his talents. I mean, we know about this film that Robeson was given editorial sort of final cut control over the film. He was involved in the making of the film from his point of view because he was given that directorial freedom or sort of editorial freedom, but also because he wanted to make a film like this that I don't believe he would have had the opportunity to do so in the United States. But yeah, he has that. I mean, every scene he's in, he has that charisma. He has that sort of scene-stealing opportunity, and it's not just when he's singing. And you can see he had a very interesting life, and you can that almost resonates from the screen when he's on it.
It's crazy because I mean, he is a big guy anyway, but he towers over everyone in not just size. It's like he's the center of gravity for every single shot of this film. It doesn't matter if it's an opera house, you're looking at him. Doesn't matter if it's on an island and he's surrounded by, thousands of people. You're always looking at him. It's quite, this guy was born to be a star.
Forgive the term, but it is the full package. I mean, as you say, he's a tall man. He's a handsome man. He's charming. He can sing. And the camera, obviously, because he was a star, the camera gravitates towards him. And that's not such a bad thing in this film at all. And I think it enhances, especially the first half of the film. I think it enhances the story and the plot and how it continues along for the rest of the runtime.
Well, picking up on the level of Robeson's control, that's probably why Arthur Tavares comes over from the States to edit, and he brings a slicker visual style. After all, he's probably best known for editing the Spanish version of Dracula for Universal in 1931.
So there's quite a bit of film heritage in this thing.
Yeah, well, it ties it back to Bela Lugosi again.
Oh, is that the one they recorded at the same time?
That's the one.
Yeah, I thought I remembered reading about that. So do we see this as a natural progression for Hammer to move away from the sort of what we sort of basically classed as a horror sort of slash and stalk-esque version of the Mary Celeste, or the Fog, as Ben compared it to, step up to a musical? Is that the natural step?
I don't think it's a case of there being any natural steps at this particular point. I mean, they were chasing the dollar or the pound, if you want to call it, at that particular time. You look at a burgeoning film studio, and what they want to do is they want to capitalize on whatever is popular, and that is what Hammer were attempting to do here. I mean, musicals in the 30s were the thing cinematically, and it made only natural sense for them to try, especially with a star like Robeson, to try and capitalize on that. And whether they did so successfully or not is arguable, I would say, with this. But they certainly made a good stab at it, I would say.
I found this to be actually one of the more memorable, certainly British films, but even musicals from this time. I was quite struck by the songs. I thought they were all very catchy. And just in terms of like British filmmaking, how often do you see a world like this on film from this period? It's crazy. I mean, the first half of it is set, purely in England and should we say in the Western world, and then the second half obviously is a complete shift into the African homecoming for Robeson's character. But one thing I was really, really struck by in terms of just story, and even it was just a completely refreshing surprise to see perhaps a vision of the world that you don't tend to see so much in films from this period. And when people look back on that period, they also tend to think of it as very segregated, and that there was huge amounts of prejudice and stuff. I mean, obviously I didn't live in that period, so I can't really comment.
Kev did.
So, Kev
Thanks.
Sorry.
I was keeping quiet.
It was heartening to see. I mean, I'm sure it was much to do with Robeson's influence on the script and final cut. That we're shown a vision of a world in which there was no mention of race, which I found really surprising. Did anyone else find that surprising?
Sure. Like
the society you see at the beginning of the film in England, everyone's coexisting in the same world. No one is sort of degraded, or no one's better than the other. They're just workers. It doesn't matter what color the skin is or where they're from. They have a drink together. They have a sing-song together. They put their arms around each other and they go home from work. And I must admit, I was expecting this film to be a lot more problematic in terms of racial stereotyping. And while there are a couple of, should we say, outdated terms used in the film that probably worth noting for anyone who's probably going to go watch this film afterwards. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but I was actually rather surprised at how progressive this film was in terms of showing societies existing together.
I think Robeson's voice as well is used to paint a picture of friendship, tranquility, camaraderie, good vibes,
hopefulness.
Very much so.
I mean, the points in which he sings in the first half of the film, he's singing out the window of his home and into the neighborhood, which is sort of transposed against scenes of niceness in the neighborhood. Yeah. And it presents this almost borders on utopian view of the area of London in which he lives in. And I completely concur with you, Adam. A small part of me yearns to hope that this is even vaguely reflective of how a mixed race area of London could have been around that time. I like you, I can't comment on whether it was or wasn't, but goodness me, it feels good to watch.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I know it's kind of twee to sort of say it, but that opening, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, where they go from working together, they're not just colleagues, they're friends, and they happen to have their colleague, their friend, who happens to be a really good singer. And they do mock him a little bit just because it's a bit of fun, but they just sort of say, no, you keep on singing. And as I say, it may be a little twee, but I found it wholesome and charming. And they're not words I would use on a daily basis, but it was, and it was just heartwarming. The fact that they could actually, I mean, this would never happen these days, but you can, in the 21st century at least, is that you would say, we're going to have a sing-song tonight.
Yeah.
And we're actually going to put it on a board in our pub saying, sing-song tonight, 7:00. That's not going to happen. But do you know what? If it did, I'd go. It would be different.
We know you.
I know, but
it's
different.
He's a master of the karaoke, everyone.
Oh, what? You haven't heard my waltzing Matilda?
If they do have a sing-song night at the bar, you do want to make sure that you bring Robeson with you as a ringer.
Oh, absolutely.
He's totally on your team.
Oh, no, he's on my team. He's on my
definitely.
team.
What I would say...
My mate Paul.
What I would say is it's a fairly timeless cinematic trope to have the everyman amongst you who can do something extraordinary and want him to fulfill his potential or her potential and make it to sort of great stardom. The other thing as well that I'll say about this film that I think rings true between the 1930s and now is that sort of yearning to understand, where we're from and who we are. I mean, things like sort of genealogy, family trees, DNA tests have never been more popular than they are now. And I think those sort of feelings and that sort of driver of the plot is just as pertinent and meaningful today as it was when this film was made. And I think it just shows that although this isn't a perfect film, it has at its core things that everyone can relate to. And I think that's one of the things that makes it quite a memorable thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I especially liked the fact that when he is discovered, his character is discovered by a famous, impresario at one point, you kind of expect there's going to be this class battle almost. Not battle maybe, but there's going to be this class distinction. You have a very, very rich white impresario who discovers this, diamond in the rough, who is a black man living in the tenement area. And this goes to show how, how I've been influenced by cinema of the time, where you kind of think that it's going to be this massive point where, he's going to have to acknowledge the fact that he's not of the same race and he's not of the same background. But again, the film surprises you. This very rich white man just treats Paul Robeson like a complete gentleman. Doesn't ever acknowledge the fact that he's from a different heritage or anything like that. He just kind of says, "You are an amazing singer. I would love to help you make your way in the world." There's never a mention of racial inequality or anything like that. It's very, very difficult to sort of comprehend this story. I think we come to it expecting a certain amount of hardship or prejudice. The point I'm trying to make is that I think I came to this film with a lot of baggage, and I was expecting it to be a lot more problematic than it was. The problems I had with this film were surprising to me, I have to say. I think I enjoyed this a lot more because it was a lot more hopeful than I expected it.
There's that beautiful line from Donizetti that says, "What's the matter of the color of his skin when what he has is color in his voice?" And I loved that. I absolutely loved it. And that's I think exactly what you've just been saying, Adam.
Can I just point out though that if an impresario comes into a pub in London and tells all the locals to shush, this is the only unbelievable bit of the film, by the way, that he gets
He's going to get a Newcastle Brown Ale bottle over the head. The crowd stitch that Jimmy.
He gets to leave the pub with all his own teeth. So,
in his hands.
Yeah. So, see, this was the only not believable bit of the film, but he actually escaped there with his life.
I don't know. I think he's pretty much surrounded by unbelievable bits because he also tells his friends to stop the car when they're belting through London at 50 miles an hour, and he hears them.
Have your traffic obsessed.
Through the docklands.
Lock the doors if you're going to break.
Those cars are really not that quiet. That's all I'm saying. You cannot hear a man singing at 50 feet.
Dearie me. Wow.
I do feel like we're kind of pre-coded into expecting certain things from films now due to stuff like My Fair Lady. And it's become such a tried trope, throughout cinema. So it is quite interesting to watch this because it's such a different spin on it.
But it does seem like a bit of a Pygmalion story to begin with. He's like, very, he's a nobody and he's pulled up from the gutter and he's given this chance and he becomes this incredible star of the stage. And then, I mean, it has to be said, it just basically halfway through just becomes a completely different film, isn't it? I mean, I would have been happy if this had been two films.
A Song of Freedom, Volume 1 and Volume 2.
I think so too.
It could have worked.
Last one,
steady. But an hour each for I mean, but that could have worked, maybe, sort of. Well, I don't know. But
no, I don't think I could watch an hour of season 2.
The second half is so jarringly different to the first. It's not only different in terms of it being a different mood or a different sort of feel, but it just almost contradicts the feeling of the first. So in the first, we have a guy who's happy. I mean, yes, it's Pygmalion story, but he's happy in his rut, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't aspire to be an opera singer, or he sings for pleasure, and the fact that he's presented with his opportunity to sing for a living is like a bonus to him. And he has this deep yearning to visit his homeland in Africa and find his people.
But when he's given the option to sing, he initially balks at it, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't really want to do it if it requires jumping through hoops. But ultimately, what we get is a narrative where he goes from, oh yes, I want to know more about my people, to he arrives in Kasanga, the island where his ancestors come from, and he decides he wants to not just know about them, but he wants to change them, and he wants to fundamentally undo their traditions and their way of life. And it's all presented in a reasonably worthy way, but it aside from sort of sensibilities, it doesn't sit right with what we've learned about him in the first half. And also from a sort of a filmmaking point of view, the first half of the film is a musical. The music's almost forgotten in the second half, largely aside from the very end of the film, where ultimately the Song of Freedom has its sort of resonance and its sort of final payoff. But I completely concur. It's two separate films.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed on that fact that, I mean, not to be too harsh on it, but from a personal side, I found it jarring in that I was settling down for 40 minutes of niceness, for want of a better term, I was just settling in and just going, this is actually quite pleasant. And also, as we know from the first episode, I'm not a massive fan of musicals, but I was actually quite enjoying Robeson and his charisma and his voice, and I was like, oh great. And then it all shifts. And is it too much of a clang? Is it too much of a brick wall to then get it back on track?
It's like watching the original Wicker Man and then all of a sudden going into the Nicolas Cage. That's how it felt to me. Because, so basically, you have this very enlightened fellow who, wants to learn about where he's from, and he wants to, learn about his past and about his people. He doesn't know, he has no background to speak of. He goes to Kasanga, turns up there in a colonialist suit, and just doesn't even attempt to integrate or learn about, the home he's always dreamed about. He just stomps in there, kicks their culture around, tells them what they're doing wrong, barks at them all. He's really arrogant. And in that respect, the film kind of turned into more of a parable about the way that the Western world sometimes march into cultures they don't truly understand and try to revolutionize them because it'll be better for them,
It's been done for centuries, mate.
Exactly. I found it really uncomfortable because, as you say, all the singing, all the joy stops.
Yeah, it's gone.
The moment he gets there, it's all misery, anger, what you're doing wrong. I'm going to tell you what you're doing wrong. How dare you even question my authority? I'm from the bloody West. How it's like, get out of my way. I'm going to sit in. There's one point where he arrives in the village with his wife, who I have to say is a great character.
Brilliant.
And she gets off the boat and says, I'm tired. So he marches up and says, we need a hut. Get out the way. And they grab this poor guy who's sitting outside of his hut by the scruff of the neck, throw him into the dirt and say, here you go, have a hut. He walks in and moans about the fact that, I suppose this will have to do.
There's no mod cons, no ensuite.
Squatters' rights.
It's like two different films. It's like this isn't the character that you watch at the beginning singing to his wife with his voice lilting over the neighborhood, charming the children to sleep. This is almost like they had two scripts and said, we have to get both of these made. Let's smash them together.
There are 6 writers on this, which is probably why it's such a problem anyway.
Wow, 6 writers, Kev.
6 writers, that's quite a mess. There's 2 on the original story itself.
we've got a big enough mess with 4 here. So, I mean, imagine what that's like.
What are you on about? I can't even read.
What I would say as well, to pick up on the point that Am's just made, is that I think this film hamstrings itself a little bit, in so much that it feels like a musical that can't quite disassociate itself from musical roots. I'll explain what I mean by saying that, sort of, it's another musical that feels the need to be based in the music industry. So in the first half of the film, the music is all based around the fact that he's a singer, that he's in an operetta, that he sings at work to sort of, make himself happy. There is a reason for song in the narrative. And then we get to the second half of the film, and he's on sort of a sad island, and there is no reason for the song. And yes, it was only a handful of years. I mean, you think The Wizard of Oz was 3 years after this, where they're singing regardless of the circumstances. And it's all to do with sort of propelling the narrative as a song. It doesn't need to be excused in the narrative. And it just shows how things changed in the 30s. It really does. And it just shows how we take for granted now what we think of as a musical, and that sort of difference of how a musical began in the late 20s as effectively a reproduction of a stage production, to what we had by the end of the 30s, which was, here's a film that's a melodrama, effectively. It just has songs dotted in it that propel the narrative along. And I think this film suffers with being right in the middle of the two.
See, that's my favorite kind of musical. it's just it's like the Blues Brothers. It has a film with a bit of singing in it. That'll do me fine.
But we don't think
I'm a Mamma Mia.
We
fan.
don't think twice about it though. Now you don't think twice about it if the characters spark into song. It's a musical. Whereas clearly in 1936 there had to be an excuse for your character to spark into song. And it really does make a difference to how a film can be written and put together.
Well, taking your example, Smokey, even in the Blues Brothers, you have a leap of logic where you have a couple of characters that will start a song, and then suddenly you've got the whole street dancing. Which is very much back to Oliver, who will buy this beautiful morning, where he starts off with one flower seller, and suddenly you've got the whole of the West End singing and dancing for no apparent reason. And there's a couple of hints at that in this as well, because every now and again you'll see like people going, Paul's singing again, lovely. So it's kind of hinting at what would become, I agree to a certain extent.
I agree, and I also think it's interesting that obviously we're already talking about the second half of the film, and we keep gravitating back towards the first half because it's just the more accessible and easier to digest and more entertaining part of the film.
It's more joyful.
Well, yeah,
like the second half of the film is kind of miserable, and it's jarringly arrogant as well. It's almost like it's bleak. Like the ending is, it's almost like, well, I've remembered this song now. So he sings the song of freedom that all the kings are supposed to know, which convinces them that he should be their king and should be able to do whatever he wants and should be able to stamp on their culture. And I mean, even the ending of the film, which is supposed to be this like, great big hurrah moment, you come away from it feeling, I wouldn't have taken his crap. No. Sorry. He just basically he stomps in there and says, "You're right. You're changing. You're changing. You're changing. I don't care how you do things. I don't care what your rituals are. Whatever. I'm going to kick them all out the way, and you're going to do what I say."
Don't forget, he does have the big medal.
He does have
he has the medallion. Yeah. He has the song. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need, basically. Yeah, it's like a driving license.
No, that's fair enough.
I think the uncomfortable nature of the second half of the film for me dates back to a scene right at the end of the first half with the anthropologist who turns up to watch him in the opera. Yeah, he turns up in his dressing room and he recognizes the bit of the song that he sung, and he talks about the people from Kasanga as being backwards and in need of help with their ignorance. Yeah, and I think that unfortunately really hangs over the back half of the film, and it really sort of seems to influence the character. And it feels uncomfortable. And as you say, there's don't get me wrong, there's merit in what John wants to achieve,
when he's in Kasanga.
Yeah.
But it's done in such a ham-fisted, uncomfortable way that it just doesn't sit right, especially from a 21st century perspective.
But I have to give it a little bit of credit in the fact that it's a kind of throwaway line in the fact that Donizetti does say, once John has returned to England or wherever they're doing their operas this week, because he has been going all around the world, is the fact that he is coming back to do a show, to earn money, to go back, to help them out. And it doesn't sound like he's forcing his ideas on them anymore. To me personally, I mean, again, I'll need your opinions on this, but it's sounding like he's just going to try and help them with whatever means he has earned by singing, and then he's helping them out. That to me is what it sounded like.
Yeah, there is a bit where the anthropologist actually says that they've stripped a lot of the trees away from the island, which has caused it to have a drought because trees attract clouds, apparently.
That's what I must admit, I picked up on that as well. Yeah. They snag the clouds? I don't
understand. Bad science.
Trees. Velcro for clouds. Who knew?
Oh, well, lads, you don't understand how trees work. Come on.
all I'm saying is that he is using his wealth now for good. He's not. To me, it ended like what he wasn't forcing his ideas. He was helping more than anything else.
I think it's purposefully ambiguous towards the end that they don't say what he's doing with his money. I agree with you, Smokey. I think that basically he's using his money for good. They don't say exactly how, because perhaps they can't explain exactly how. But yes, but I think the idea is that they've maybe come to some kind of agreement that I like to think, in my own sort of utopian view of how this film ends, that they've perhaps come to some agreement that is between his "we must wipe out all your culture and here's how the world should be," and their kind of "no, we don't want to do anything you tell us to do" type of sort of thing. So I like to think it was a bit of a middle ground was discovered.
Okay, then. So we'll literally finish with recommendations. Let's go around the table. Kev, would you recommend this film?
No, unfortunately not. It's enjoyable, but it's not one I'd want to go back to.
Okie doke. All right, fair enough. I'll go next. I would. It's not an easy watch in some places, but it surprised me how much I did enjoy the first half.
I'm shocked.
I know. I was too. And so it was just sort of like, it's a musical, and it's from the 30s. I'm not going to enjoy this, and it surprised me. Yeah, the second half is not. It doesn't fit, but I didn't dislike the film. So if someone, let me put it this way: if someone asked me my opinion of the film, I would walk through it a little more slowly and sort of say, well, here's X, Y, and Z of why you should and shouldn't watch it. But no, I wouldn't not recommend it. Ben?
Yes, I would. I would say watch it twice, as I have. I appreciate it a lot more the second time. Watch it for Robeson's performance. Enjoy the musical numbers. There's the second half isn't great, but overall the film is enjoyable. And I think, we're going back, sort of, 85 years? I think there's a lot to enjoy.
Wow.
There really is.
Wonderful. Adam?
I was surprised by how much I liked the film. I do think the first half is much better. And by the way, this isn't an opinion that's a new opinion. I mean, Graham Greene reviewed this film when it was released and said it's incredible how badly the two halves of this film marry up together. It's almost like two different movies. And I completely agree with that. I think the second half is not distasteful. It's just problematic. It just doesn't fit. But the first half, I was really charmed by it. To be honest, I liked the songs. I thought a couple of them were bangers. Like the Lonely Road song, I really liked.
Such an earworm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bangers.
It's a great song. Incredible. Lonely Road. I mean, I was Lonely Road. That's such a great song. And Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is, I mean, I've seen a few of his films. This, for me, is this is one of those performances that you just can't take your eyes away from. And although his character does transform completely in the second half, I don't think it spoils the first half. So it's a very odd film for me. It's one that I've seen twice now, and I really enjoyed. I do have issues with it, but I think if you're curious at all, then go and find out for yourself. Your opinion will be as unique as ours.
And that completes our tour of Room 2 of the House of Hammer. And we hope you enjoyed Song of Freedom. In the next episode, you'll be taken to room number 3, which houses a tale of wagers, sibling rivalry, and equestrian hijinks. Yes, really. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the subscribe button on the podcatcher of your choice, or leave us a nice rating. And many thanks to those who have done so already. You can find us on Twitter at HouseHammerPod or Instagram at HouseHammerPod. And if you'd like to drop us an email, it's scream@houseofhammerpodcast.com. And so from myself, Smokey.
From me, Adam Roach.
From me, Kev.
From me, Ben Tillison.
We wish you a very good night and look forward to welcoming you again next time to the House of Hammer.